$72 million. You're the first place winner.
Imagine one day you receive a call that tells you won a life-changing amount of money. It sounds like a dream, right? In reality, this exact situation is used to scam people out of thousands of dollars. Yet during one of these calls, the scammer bit off far more than they could handle. Instead, they attempted to take money off someone that was the former director of the FBI and CIA. Today we're going to go over the amazing story, how the scammer was eventually caught, as well as how much money they had taken off their previous victims. So let's get started. During June 2014, then 90-year-old William Webster received a phone call from an unknown number at his house. As he picked up the phone, he found out the news many of us wish to hear. Webster had won $15.5 million in a lottery jackpot. On top of that, he also won a brand new 2014 Mercedes-Benz. However, Webster felt something was wrong, especially when the caller requested $50,000 from Webster to cover the taxes on the prize. However, William Webster wasn't the average senior citizen. He had a history that would lead to a lot of problems for the caller. Born in 1924, William H. Webster would go on to serve in the U.S. Navy during World War II and later in the Korean War. Between these two battles, Webster went to law school to get his degree. After working in the private sector after the Navy, Webster would go on to work in public office, eventually getting nominated to be a judge in the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Missouri. He was later nominated as a judge for the United States Court of Appeals for the 8th Circuit as well. Then in 1978, Webster was installed by President Jimmy Carter as the director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. He held on to this role until 1987. Then President Ronald Reagan appointed Webster as director of the Central Intelligence Agency, becoming the first person to have held both of these top illustrious positions. Webster stayed at the CIA until 1991. Afterwards, he then practiced law in the private sector. In 2005, Webster was then appointed chair of the Homeland Security Advisory Council, a position he held until August 2020 at the age of 96. The apparent life-changing phone call to Webster came from a man that stated his name was David Morgan. He introduced himself as the head of Mega Millions Lottery, which brings up more questions. Why would the head of a massive corporation be making calls to inform winners about their prize? Webster was getting more and more suspicious. Many holes were appearing in Morgan's story, and it wouldn't be long until the situation began to escalate. Mega Millions isn't a fake company. In fact, it's one of the biggest lottery companies in the U.S. It first drew numbers in 2002. Now it's played across 45 states and various American territories. In 2018, the biggest single jackpot winner was announced. The lucky individual had won an astonishing $1.5 billion. It's one of the biggest amounts in the world. However, it took another year until a billion-dollar prize was actually claimed. An anonymous resident in South Carolina came forward with the winning ticket. By using the Mega Millions name, scammers have a good chance of getting in touch with someone who takes part in their lottery. As such, the hope of the criminal caller is that it would take very little to convince the apparent prize winner that they had in fact won a large sum of cash. But it doesn't always work. Webster still wasn't keen on parting with his cash and handing it to a stranger on the phone, especially when the reason made little sense. Once Webster hung up, he reached out to his contacts within the FBI to get a plan in motion. Over the next few weeks, Morgan would call regularly for the cash. In one phone call, Morgan stated that Webster was the first prize winner, that instead of the previous prize, he had now won $72 million. Without much of a reaction from Webster, Morgan then used various details in Webster's life to intimidate the Navy veteran. Morgan stated, quote, "I know that you was a judge. You was a lawyer. You was in the U.S. Navy, Homeland Security, the basketball team, and all of those stuff. I do your background check." Unquote. Morgan hadn't done his background check well enough, it seems. After all, he missed out that Webster was a leading figure in two big security forces in the U.S. The next time Morgan called, Linda Webster, William's wife, answered. Morgan stepped it up and began describing the Webster house in detail. He wanted more of a reaction from the Websters as he was growing impatient. Morgan even used a thinly veiled threat. He informed Linda that he knew the house was empty the previous night. Thinking on her feet, Linda called an FBI agent on her mobile phone. The agent was then able to listen to the rest of the conversation. Due to a lack of reaction, Morgan was now frustrated after that phone call. He kept calling the house and asking for the cash, yet the Websters weren't responding to his requests. With no patience left, Morgan's mask began to slip as his demands got harsher. During one call, he ordered $6,000 from Linda, a far cry from the original $50,000 amount required. However, this amount didn't seem to be for tax purposes. Instead, it was just extortion now. After that conversation, Linda would receive numerous vivid calls over the next few days from Morgan. Morgan threatened her and William's life if they didn't pay the amount soon, even stating he would send his man to harm them if they didn't transfer the cash soon. Unknown to Morgan, many of these conversations were recorded by the FBI as evidence. Now they had to find who this Morgan was and catch him before he could take more cash from people, or if his threats were serious, before he harmed another person. By examining the phone number that Morgan called on, the FBI found a major lead. The number was connected to a U.S. work visa application form from a few years ago. However, it wasn't for the name David Morgan. Instead, the name registered on the form was Kenyal Thomas. Thomas was a 29-year-old Jamaican man. Due to living in Jamaica, arresting Thomas was a difficult task for the Bureau. There was little hope that the FBI would be able to stop the extortion schemes from Thomas. It was later discovered that this isn't the only time Thomas has tried to scam people through the phone. In fact, he was linked to 30 other scams. His crimes had robbed hundreds of thousands of dollars from his many victims, a large number of which were senior citizens in the U.S. During one of his hoaxes, he contacted an 82-year-old man from California. Thomas stated to the gentleman that his name was Obama. From this ruse, the victim ended up handing Thomas $600,000. Another man in California had also unfortunately sent Thomas $87,000 after being on the receiving end of a similar sham. Since the dawn of smartphones, telephone scams have become a big problem for law enforcement and the victims. The criminals will use various methods, mostly through threats, to try and convince the victim that they need to provide money or their bank details urgently. Often the criminals will masquerade as people in authority. These criminals can even spoof their caller ID to appear as though the call comes from a genuine source. According to the FTC statistics in 2017, 40% of Americans in their 20s have reported they have lost money due to phone scams, while only 18% of Americans over 70 have reported the same problem. However, this statistic has caused speculation that older people might be targeted more, but they won't report it due to embarrassment. Scammers will favor going after older people since they often have bigger savings in their bank and tend to be more trusting of strangers. One scam involves targeting older people. The criminal will pretend to be their grandchild and state they need a cash sum for an emergency of some kind. They use snippets of personal information to trick their victims. One victim was told from their apparent grandson that he was in jail and needed bail money for a crime he didn't commit. Thankfully, in this case, the gentleman asked further questions that proved the call was a scam. Another type of phone scam is quite prominent during America's summertime. During that period, people will often be waiting to hear back from the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, as they would have recently sent in their taxes for the year. The scammers will call up people and claim to be from the IRS. They will then threaten the victim and claim they owe a large debt to the government. If they don't pay it there and then over the phone, the IRS will begin legal proceedings, which can result in the victim being arrested or deported. In 2019, the FTC stated that imposter fraud has cost U.S. victims $667 million altogether. While also during 2019, UK finances have stated that these types of scams have cost British victims 354 million British pounds, which is around $454 million. In 2017, the Websters and the many other families targeted by Thomas finally got justice. Thomas had flown into New York in order to see a friend. He had no idea that the FBI were tracking him. As soon as he got off the plane, he was arrested. In 2019, Thomas appeared in court for his crimes. The Websters spoke in court about their love of Jamaica. They would regularly visit the Caribbean country in order to see friends. However, after all of Thomas's threats, they no longer felt safe visiting the island. Upon hearing this, Thomas apologized. He stated he never meant to hurt them and that Jamaica loves tourists. Chief Judge Beryl Howell of the District Court in Washington criticized the time it took the FBI to bring Thomas to justice since he wasn't extradited from Jamaica. However, Linda Webster stood up for the Bureau by stating, quote, "Our FBI has a very full plate. They're doing amazing work," unquote. Due to his various extortion schemes, Thomas was sent to prison for 71 months, nearly 6 years altogether. After serving his sentence, Thomas will be deported back to Jamaica, hopefully to never target the vulnerable or anyone in any more scams. And that's it. Is there anyone who would be harder to scam than the former head of the FBI and CIA? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, please like, share, and subscribe. All of those actions really help us out. Finally, thanks for joining us today. We'll see you next time